While I was away on study leave, I did a lot of thinking and praying about, as I think most of us were doing that week, about what the state of Israel has been doing to the Palestinians. And I know for many of us, and not just me, that reflection was not just about that 1 week or what's happening right now, but about years and decades of conflict and oppression of the Palestinian people. And for some time, I felt a need to say something from the pulpit about what's going on, even before the most recent headlines, but I just hadn't found the right time. Or maybe there is no right time to just dive in and start talking about it. During the discernment period, one question I kept asking myself is, what needs to be said? UNICEF reports that 17,000 children have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, 2023, an average of 28 children a day for 21 months. Does it need to be said that killing 17,000 children is evil? Does it need to be said that killing any child is evil? Since October 7th, multiple hospitals and all 12 universities in Gaza have been bombed by Israel. Does it need to be said that bombing hospitals and universities is evil? Does it need to be said that prohibiting food deliveries to starving people is evil, or shooting starving people as they come for food? Does it need to be said that when a nation responds to a terrorist attack by bombing civilians and leveling neighborhoods, that those attacks are also terrorism? And does it need to be said that when this killing is done with US bombs and US weapons and US money, that we are all, as Americans, complicit in the evil? I think the answer is yes. I think these things are happening and continuing to happen, and we need to call it what it is. So there, I've said it. What Israel is doing to the Palestinians is evil, and they are doing it with the blessing and support of our government. Of course, it could be said that October 7th was evil, and it was, but when evaluating violence, I believe scale matters. Killing someone is worse than punching someone. Killing 10 people is worse than killing one person. Of course, all killing is wrong, but the scale of violence matters. Every life is precious. Yet killing 60,000 people and starving an entire population is worse than killing 1,200. If we are seeking to reduce harm in the world, the scale of the violence matters. Those with a greater ability to inflict harm have a greater responsibility to control themselves. Now, maybe you don't agree with that kind of thinking of comparing violence, and it's not an easy thing to think about. And that's okay, because that's not the main point I want to talk about today. What I really want to talk about is, why is this so hard to talk about? How do we, as good progressive people, get all tangled up when we try to talk about this issue? You know, there's even a term for it. The term has its own Wikipedia page. It's progressive except for Palestine. Good people will take progressive stands on everything from immigrant rights to anti-gun violence in the US to anti-poverty work, yet are silent on the state of Israel's oppressive treatment of the Palestinian people. Progressive except for Palestine. People who will speak for every violently oppressed group in the world will get tongue-tied when speaking about Palestinians. Suddenly, when the victims are Palestinian and the aggressor is Israel, the ethics of bombing hospitals and killing children becomes complicated. So what I'd like to share today are some principles that I find helpful in discerning where I stand on all of this, and maybe you'll find these helpful too in discerning where you stand and your response. Already I really said one of the principles, I kind of snuck it in. Scale matters. The scale of the violence matters. You know, the Bible's principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth may seem barbaric to us, but it's actually a principle that was created to limit the escalation of violence. So instead of you kill one of my family members, I kill your whole family. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. There is justice in the world, but violence has a tendency to escalate very quickly. and an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is a principle to keep violence from escalating. And so scale matters when we're judging how to respond to violence. So that's the first principle. A second principle is this: hurt people hurt people. Whenever we see violence in the world, whether it's interpersonal or international, the perpetrator is perpetuating a cycle that did not start with them. Now, this doesn't perfectly scale from interpersonal to international, but I think it's a helpful principle anyway. And to be clear, it's not justifying or excusing actions of violent people. It's about understanding what's happening. If we ever want to get to the root of violence in our world, we need to understand that violence is born out of violence. Hurt people hurt people. Zionism is an ethno-cultural nationalist movement born out of the Jewish experience of being victims of violence for centuries. The Holocaust is the worst of that violence, but Jews have faced violent anti-Semitism for centuries. After the Holocaust, Zionism did gain traction. It got crystallized and supported by a broader group of people, but anti-Semitism is so much more than the Holocaust. So if we want to understand Zionism, we must understand that it's a movement based in trauma. It's a movement based in fear and a desire to protect one's people. Jews represent 0.2% of the world population and have experienced a disproportionate amount of oppression. 0.2%, just for context, Christians are about 30%. Muslims are about 25%, Hindus about 15%. Jews are 0.2% of the population, and yet they've experienced this disproportionate amount of oppression at the hands of Christians. The Holocaust was envisioned and created and executed by Christians. So it was trauma born of this anti-Semitic violence that led to Zionism and to the creation of the State of Israel, which was then itself a violent act. It was a continuation of the violence. The creation of Israel is a perpetuation of the cycles of violence. You can't occupy land that is already occupied without violence. The Nakba in 1948 was not the only violent act by Israel, but it was the worst, expelling 700 Palestinians from their homes and their land. There are still Palestinians who have the keys, have their grandparents' keys to the home that they were expelled from. The organization Jewish Voice for Peace, I think, summarizes the whole situation very well. They write, "We know that opposing Zionism or even discussing it can be painful. It can strike at the deepest trauma," there's that word, "and the greatest fears," there's that word, "of many of us. Zionism is a 19th century political ideology that emerged in a moment when Jews were defined as irrevocably outside of Christian Europe. European anti-Semitism threatened and ended millions of Jewish lives in pogroms, in exile, and in the Holocaust." And then Jewish Voice for Peace talks about their own discernment. "Through study and action, through deep relations with Palestinians fighting for their own liberation, and through our own understanding of Jewish safety and self-determination, we have come to see that Zionism was a failed and false answer to the desperately real question many of our ancestors faced: how to protect Jewish lives from murderous anti-Semitism in Europe. While it had many strains historically, the Zionism that took hold and stands today is a settler colonial movement establishing an apartheid state where Jews have more rights than others. Our own history teaches us how dangerous this can be." So the second principle is simply a fact. It's not to justify or excuse what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, but to understand what we are dealing with. Hurt people hurt people. Hurt people should not hurt people, and we should all work to reduce harm in this world, and that probably means coming together to confront and stop people from hurting people. But hopefully by understanding the cyclical nature of violence, we could be more effective in our efforts to stop the violence. A third guiding principle for discerning how to respond is you don't have to have all the answers to speak up. You don't have to have a degree in political science or have studied the entire history of the Middle East conflict to say that you don't agree with bombing hospitals, universities, and children. Maybe you have heard that Hamas hides under hospitals, and you don't know what to do about that. but you don't have to have a solution to that. Hospitals are supposed to be off the table as military targets. The Geneva Conventions say that bombing hospitals is a war crime. Yet at some point, Israel decided and the US agreed that bombing hospitals was okay now. It's not. And we can say that in any conversation, regardless of what we know or don't know. I think it's wrong to bomb hospitals. I think it's wrong to target children. I think it's wrong to starve whole populations. We don't need to have a plan to solve the conflict before we are equipped to say what lines should and should not be crossed. A fourth guiding principle related to this issue in particular is that Zionism is not the same as Judaism, which is not the same as the state of Israel. There are Jews who are not Zionists, and there are Zionists who are not Jews. The largest Zionist lobbying group in the US is an evangelical Christian group, Christians United for Israel. It's actually fair to wonder where Zionism would be today without evangelical Christian support. Zionism is not Judaism. And the state of Israel does not represent all Jews. There are Israelis who are not Jewish, about 20%. And of course, most Jews in the world do not live in Israel. The point of this principle is that being anti-Zionist and criticizing the state of Israel does not make a person anti-Semitic. If we think in terms of a Venn diagram, with one circle being Zionism and one circle being Judaism and one circle being the state of Israel, yes, there are places where they're going to overlap, but we can criticize one circle without criticizing all the other circles they're connected to. We can criticize Zionism and can criticize the state of Israel without criticizing Judaism as a religion or Jews as a people. We do have to be clear in our conversations that we are not criticizing the Jews or Jews as a people or Judaism, but because that would be generalizing and stereotyping, and that would move into anti-Semitism. But we can't be afraid to criticize Zionism and Israel for fear of being called anti-Semitic. A fifth guiding principle, the idea that is enshrined in the First Amendment of our Constitution is a really good idea. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The mixing of state power and religion is a toxic combination. This is true whether the state is enforcing Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism. We, as followers of a man who was tortured and executed by just such a toxic combination of religious and state power, we can stand on this principle on both civic and religious grounds. A person's life, liberty, and security should be guaranteed independent of their religious beliefs or affiliation. And we should be very skeptical about the idea of a Jewish state, just as we should be skeptical about the idea of a Christian state, or as an Islamic state, or any state that privileges the people of one religion over another. So those are 5 guiding principles that help me navigate all this, and maybe they're helpful to you. One that I snuck in early, scale matters. The scale of violence matters. 2, violence creates more violence. It's cyclical. Hurt people hurt people. 3, you don't have to have all the answers to speak up. 4, we can criticize Zionism and the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic. And 5, separation of state power and religion is a very good idea that we should all support. Now let's close with a reflection on our text from Revelation, which is all very relevant. The context is that John, the visionary, has just envisioned all kinds of terrible tribulations upon the earth. He's had visions of plagues, natural disasters, famine, war, and even a vision of the wild animals rising up and killing the people. You didn't know that was a possibility, did you? But then he sees this pause of the great tribulations, when 12,000 people of each tribe, Israelite tribe, who, quote, serve our God, are given some kind of seal, the seal of God on their forehead. Now, 12,000 is probably a symbolic number. I'm thinking it means a lot, but not everybody, but we don't really know for sure. We don't even know exactly what the seal is supposed to do, except it seems to provide some kind of protection or assurance of survival for those who receive it. So that happens, and then John has this other vision. This time, there is a great uncountable multitude. So the first one was 144,000. The second one is an uncountable multitude standing before the throne of God from every tribe and people and language. In verse 14, it says that all of these people, and I would say that goes back to the 144,000 as well, they have all come out of a great hardship. These are all people who have suffered greatly. And that's the only explanation for their inclusion in this scene. What qualifies all of these diverse people to receive God's seal or stand before God's throne is not their religious beliefs, but the suffering they have experienced. Their suffering is the qualifier. Now remember, Revelation is not about predicting some future pie in the sky, sweet by and by heavenly thing. It's about revealing spiritual values, or another way to say that is revealing what God values, what God cherishes, what breaks God's heart, or bluntly, whose side is God on? So this seems to be saying that as we look around the world, the people God values most are the people who are suffering the most. God is on their side. And that means at this moment, if we value what God values, we value Palestinian lives. And yes, we could blame Israel for the suffering over there, but I think we all know that Israel could not be doing what it's doing to the Palestinians without U.S. support. So as U.S. citizens, as taxpayers, as voters, we must all confess that we are a part of this problem. And if God is on the Palestinian side, then right now the U.S. is not on God's side. So where does that leave us, and what do we do? Well, one step is to get clear on where we stand, to try to blow away this moral fog surrounding this issue for so many of us. And I hope the principles I shared are helpful. Scale of violence matters. Violence is cyclical. You don't have to have all the answers to speak up. We can critique Zionism and Israel without being anti-Semitic. And separation of state power and religion is a very good idea. But beyond getting clear about our thinking, we can educate ourselves. Educate ourselves on what's happening. It's hard. It's so easy to try to look away from the suffering, but we can look at it. We can read stories about it. We can go to news outlets that are not U.S. news outlets that are often covering this much more deeply than U.S. outlets are. We can listen to Palestinian voices. At 4 p.m. today here in the sanctuary, there's going to be a film screening of a BBC-produced documentary of doctors in Gaza and the experiences that they've had there. And there will be a doctor who is just in Gaza serving, who will be here in person answering questions and sharing about his experience. Beyond that, there is a vigil for Gaza every Sunday at 5 p.m. at Town and Country, if you're a stand on the corner and hold signs kinds of person. Or if you want to give money, Multi-Faith Voices for Peace and Justice on their website has a list of charities that the steering committee recommends for supporting the victims of the violence. In terms of political advocacy, we can advocate for legislation to end U.S. support of Israel. We can advocate for U.S. recognizing Palestine as a state, as France and Canada have now promised to do, and England is considering. And both of those in American politics right now might seem impossible, but they're only impossible until they aren't. So the big theological point, and I'll close with this, is that God stands with those who suffer. We believe the slaughtered lamb is on the throne of God. We believe in a crucified Christ. We believe that whatever you do to the least of these, you do to Christ. So if we want to be on God's side, we should be in solidarity with those who suffer the most. We believe God is a liberator. If we want to be on God's side, we seek liberation for all who are oppressed. God wants to see an end to the cycles of violence. And hurt people hurt people. But at some point, somebody has to stop the hurting. Amen.